They stole her brilliance, buried her name, and called it progress, but Kira Jennings didn't vanish. She vanished to rebuild. Now, armed with proof, a powerful prototype, and the man who once betrayed her heart now fighting by her side, she walks back into the lion's den not for vengeance, but for a reckoning that will crumble an empire. Kira Jennings sat frozen as the words washed over her like cold water. Kira, after 15 years with Tech Vantage, we're restructuring your position, Marjorie Thompson announced, her voice carrying a barely concealed note of satisfaction. She sat across from Kira in the small conference room, flanked by Denise from HR, both of them wearing carefully practiced expressions of corporate regret. The company is moving in a new direction, Denise added, sliding a manila folder across the table. Your contributions have been valuable, but we're consolidating the research division under the product development team. Kira nodded, accepting the folder without opening it. Inside would be the standard severance package, 2 weeks pay for every year of service, 3 months of continued health coverage, and a list of career counseling resources she would never use. I completely understand, she replied calmly, her voice steady and measured. Relief flashed across their faces. They had expected a different response: tears, protests, or anger. After all, she was a 55-year-old woman being pushed out of a tech company where youth was prized above experience. But what they didn't know was that Kira had anticipated this moment for weeks, ever since a misdirected internal email landed in her inbox a month ago. We'd like you to clean out your desk by Friday, Marjorie continued, gaining confidence from Kira's composed response. We'll need your keycard, company laptop, and phone before you leave. Your team will be notified this afternoon. Her team, 6 brilliant engineers she had handpicked and mentored. The same team that helped her develop the distributed processing algorithm that powered Tech Vantage's flagship product, AccountSphere software used by over 40% of Fortune 500 companies. Of course, Kira said, rising from her chair. Is there anything else? Marjorie and Denise exchanged glances, slightly unsettled by her professionalism. That's all for now. Thank you for making this easier, Marjorie said. Kira walked back to her office, passing the glass-walled executive conference room. Inside, she saw CEO Victor Lawson gesturing dramatically at a PowerPoint titled Q3 Revenue Projections. Victor, who had stood on stage at last year's industry conference, taking credit for her algorithm, calling her merely one of our researchers, she closed her office door behind her, pulled out her phone, and sent a text message. It's happening. Friday is my last day. The response came immediately. Perfect timing. Contracts are ready. Dinner tonight to finalize details. She looked at the calendar on her desk. It was Wednesday. Friday would be her last day at Tech Vantage. Monday would change everything. That evening, Kira met Gregory Sullivan at Meridian, an upscale restaurant located far from Tech Vantage's headquarters. As CEO of Precision Systems, Tech Vantage's biggest competitor, Greg had arranged for a private alcove screened off from the rest of the restaurant. They did it, Greg said, shaking his head after they ordered. I suspected they might, but cutting the very person who developed their core technology. Victor never did understand what you created. Kira smiled. He saw the interface, the marketing potential, not the architecture underneath. 3 months ago, I discovered Tech Vantage had never filed the patent for my algorithm. When I asked about it, they said it was an oversight, but their response seemed off, so I checked our internal documentation. I found a strategy memo outlining plans to claim the algorithm as company-developed technology. They were going to push me out before they secured the patent. Greg leaned forward, intrigued. What they didn't know was that I'd already been working on improvements to the algorithm on my own time, she continued, using my equipment outside work hours. Those improvements increased processing efficiency by 43%. I filed the patent under my name last month. It was approved last week. All the paperwork is finalized, Greg said, sliding a folder across the table. Once you sign, Precision Systems acquires exclusive licensing rights to your patent. The press release goes out on Monday. You come on board as Chief Innovation Officer. Kira flipped through the folder, though she knew the details by heart. A seven-figure signing bonus, substantial equity, ongoing royalties, offers for her entire team. What do you think Victor's face will look like when he finds out? Greg asked. I'm more concerned about my team, Kira replied. They don't deserve to be caught in the crossfire. They're already covered. We have offers for all 6 senior roles. Raises. Kira signed the final page and closed the folder. In one elegant move, she had secured her future, protected her team, and taken ownership of her life's work. To new beginnings, Greg said, raising his glass. And to owning your value, Kira replied, clinking her glass against his. The next 2 days passed in a blur of exit interviews and transition meetings. Rumors swirled throughout the office. Sympathy radiated from co-workers who passed her in the hallway. Junior developers asked for LinkedIn recommendations. Kira left nothing to chance. She documented every detail, every handoff, every password, not out of courtesy, but to create an unimpeachable record of professional conduct. She made sure there would be no question of what she had taken with her. Nothing that belonged to TechVantage. Her final exit interview. Denise from HR pushed a non-disclosure agreement across the table. You understand that any intellectual property developed during your employment remains the property of TechVantage. Of course, Kira replied with polite clarity. Anything developed during company time, using company resources. Denise checked boxes, never noticing the deliberate phrasing. You affirm that you have no copies of proprietary information. I have taken nothing that belongs to TechVantage, Kira answered truthfully. The patent was hers. As she packed her belongings, family photos, old conference badges, the coffee mug her team had gifted her last Christmas. Marjorie stopped by. Just checking everything's clear for your departure, she said, leaning against the doorframe. Crystal clear, Kira replied. Marjorie hesitated. You know, these decisions are never personal. Victor just feels the company needs to move in a more youthful direction. Kira looked up, her eyes calm and steady. I understand. Business is business. Something in her tone made Marjorie pause. But the moment passed. What threat could a 55-year-old woman pose? Will you be taking some time off? I already have something lined up. I start Monday. Marjorie blinked. That's fast. Anything interesting? Very. A leadership role. I'm excited. Marjorie nodded. Already moving on. Kira walked out of TechVantage's sleek headquarters for the last time. Her keycard surrendered, her cardboard box of personal belongings in hand. She looked back one last time at the building where she'd given 15 years of her life. On the top floor, the executive conference room was still lit up, probably preparing to redistribute her responsibilities among cheaper younger staff. They had no idea that within 72 hours, that same room would host a crisis meeting they would never forget. And Monday would be the day everything changed. The days following the press conference were a blur of interviews, product launches, and celebratory emails. But beneath the surface, Kira Jennings felt like a volcano waiting to erupt. She sat at her desk late into the night, eyes scanning endless lines of code, financial records, and board meeting minutes. She was searching for anything that would confirm her growing suspicion that the new director, Lana Rowe, was systematically cutting her out of the company she had built from scratch. Greg noticed a change in her. Their morning coffees grew quieter, their usual evening walks through the rose garden shorter, more tense. He knew better than to press her when she was like this. Still, one evening, as they sat on the old wooden bench that Kira had placed under the magnolia tree, he gently reached for her hand. You are doing it again, Kira, he said, quietly doing what she asked, not meeting his gaze, holding it all inside. You are not alone in this. Whatever it is. Kira closed her eyes and let the silence carry them for a while. She wanted to tell him everything, but a part of her held back, not out of mistrust, but fear that speaking the truth would make it real. She had recently discovered something odd hidden deep within the new facial recognition update code was a sequence she had not approved or reviewed. It allowed for silent data transfers to a third-party server. The server was encrypted and masked through multiple proxy layers, but she traced it to a cybersecurity firm owned by one of Lana's former associates. Her heart raced as she printed the logs. She knew this wasn't just a mistake. It was corporate espionage, and Lana was behind it. She remembered the smile Lana gave her during the press conference. It wasn't one of pride. It was triumph. She locked the documents in her home safe and began planning her next move. First, she needed someone she could trust fully. Someone on the inside at a company event a week later. Kira met Ava, a brilliant junior engineer known for her ethical code work. Kira had kept an eye on her for some time. Ava reminded her of herself a decade ago, fresh with ideas and fire, but still grounded. Ava, she said, pulling her aside into a quiet hallway. Why, I need your help. This has to stay between you. Ava nodded, her eyes widening slightly as Kira handed her an encrypted flash drive and a list of tasks. I need you to replicate this code independently, then run it in a sandbox and tell me what it does. I need confirmation of it. Took the drive and slipped it into her pocket. No questions, no hesitation. Over the next few weeks, Ava reported back in fragments, texts, emails, late-night encrypted calls. You were right, Ms. Jennings. It masks a real-time data stream. She's selling our tech. Kira felt the ground shift under her feet. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft on a massive scale, and it was endangering the users who trusted them. Lana wasn't just replacing her. She was rewriting the entire ethos of the company into something unrecognizably. Tension escalated as Lana began pushing through a board vote to officially replace Kira as CDO, citing burnout and the need for fresh leadership. The board was divided, some loyal to Kira, some lured by the rapid profits Lana's aggressive strategies promised. Greg grew more concerned. He saw Kira slipping into longer silences and sleepless nights. He tried to convince her to go public, but Kira wasn't ready. She needed something irrefutable. Then came the night she found the voice memo, a recorded conversation between Lana and a board member discussing how to manipulate Kira's mental health narrative to justify her removal. She sat frozen in her study, listening to it on loop. The betrayal burned deeper than she imagined, but Kira Jennings was not a woman who broke under pressure. She transformed. She called Ava and Greg the next morning. We are going to expose them, she said calmly, not with a scandal but with brilliance. A plan began to take shape. They would launch a counter-platform, a secure, transparent, ethical version of the technology with full user control and privacy at its core. But more importantly, they would show the public exactly how far Lana had strayed from the company's founding principles. Ava worked on the platform. Greg contacted his old journalist friend Mia Tran, who had once exposed a major Wall Street embezzler. Mia listened carefully as Greg laid out the pieces. She agreed to dig deeper under one condition: full access to the evidence and an exclusive when the story broke. Kira handed her everything: logs, code, voice memo, and board minutes. Mia's eyes widened. This is going to shake the industry. By the end of the month, the platform prototype was ready. The launch would be subtle, a whisper before the storm. They released it under a shell company and watched the downloads climb as users flocked to something honest. Meanwhile, Lana was preparing for the annual shareholders summit. She had no idea that the bombshell was ticking quietly under her nose. Kira stood in front of the mirror the night before the summit, dressed in a sleek black suit. Her eyes were steady, her hands firm. Greg walked in and kissed her forehead. No turning back. No, there never was, she replied. The curtain was about to rise, and the real performance was just beginning. Would Lana see it coming, or had her ambition blinded her completely? Kira smiled slightly as she stepped into the waiting car. The next 24 hours would change everything. Days grew colder as Kira Jennings delved deeper into the shadows that loomed over Innovizink. The more she discovered, the more fractured the truth became. The routine she once found solace in was now haunted by suspicion and the weight of unspoken lies. Her mornings started not with quiet meditation but frantic note-taking, piecing together odd emails, cryptic calendar entries, and discrepancies in financial summaries. Her instincts screamed that something monumental was being hidden, and the people she had trusted most were at the center of it. She spent hours in her home office poring over encrypted documents she'd decrypted using tools only someone with her tech fluency could master. Kira cross-referenced invoices, board meeting summaries, and internal memos. A pattern began to form: diverted funds, unauthorized patent licensing, and internal collusion masked by forged approval records. The signatures used for the licenses matched hers, only she had never signed them. Kira's fingers trembled as she stared at the digitally forged approval sheets. Her name was there in ink, on contracts with foreign subsidiaries she had no recollection of reviewing. She printed every document, placed them into a hidden leather briefcase, and stored it beneath her floorboards, behind a loose panel she had once installed to hide emergency cash. Now it was a vault for something far more valuable: the truth. The real blow came when she visited Dr. Raymond Older, a former legal advisor turned investigative auditor who had helped her during the early days of Innoviz Inc. He confirmed her worst fears. The company had signed over proprietary development rights to a shadow organization registered in the Caymans, and the only board members with access to authorize such a transaction were herself, Chairman Darnell, and Greg. She returned home with her world unrecognizable. Kira curled up on her couch with her laptop on her knees, her fireplace burning low. The light flickered on her face as she read emails between Greg and Darnell, exchanged in code, but not enough to mask their betrayal. Her hands clutched her knees as the tears came, not just from heartbreak but from rage. The man she had loved, trusted with her plans, her algorithms, her vulnerabilities, had been siphoning her life's work. Every whispered promise of partnership had been a lie, but not everything Greg had done had been dishonest. The messages shifted tone weeks before the betrayal finalized. Greg had expressed hesitation, doubt, and even guilt. In one, he wrote, "We can't keep doing this to her. She's built everything from nothing. We owe her more." Kira printed that message and burned it in the fireplace. She wouldn't let guilt rewrite the narrative. Betrayal was betrayal. Intentions didn't excuse actions. Over the following days, she orchestrated a plan, not a rash emotional retaliation, but a calculated dismantling. She had enough on all of them to destroy their reputations and unravel their empires. But she didn't want chaos. She wanted control. Kira met with Nadine Zhang, a fierce corporate attorney with a reputation for handling dirty internal wars. Nadine, intrigued by the case and impressed by the meticulous evidence, agreed to represent her in total secrecy. They set up an off-site command hub in an old co-working space downtown. From there, they traced money trails, created backups, and lined up whistleblowers among mid-level managers who had begun to grow wary of Innovising's sudden internal shifts. Meanwhile, Kira began to reappear at board meetings. She smiled, spoke little, and listened more. She let Greg speak as though nothing had changed, his eyes never quite meeting hers. When they were alone in the elevator one evening, he reached out to touch her arm. "I didn't want it to be this way," he said quietly. Kira stepped away, keeping her voice steady. "It never had to be this way. But now that it is, there's no turning back." He swallowed hard, guilt painted across his features. But guilt was no longer her concern. By the end of the week, she had filed a formal complaint to the Federal Financial Ethics Committee under a pseudonym, supplying documents that proved the embezzlement and falsified patent licensing. She knew it would take weeks to trigger an investigation, but it was a fuse already lit. Her final move was planting a secure keystroke logger on Greg's personal Innoviz Inc. laptop. It captured him, logging into a secure offshore banking portal and transferring funds. She now had timestamps, access codes, and surveillance stills. One night, as she walked back to her car under the gray drizzle of a late autumn rain, she found Greg waiting beside her vehicle. He looked gaunt, his coat drenched. "They're pulling out," he said, voice cracking. "The offshore backers." Darnell's panicking. She didn't reply. She opened her car door. "I never wanted to lose you," he said, stepping closer. "What we had," Kira looked at him, eyes steel. "What we had was a lie with flowers." She closed the door and drove off, leaving him standing in the rain. That night, Kira Jennings didn't cry. She sat at her desk in the co-working hub, the city lights blinking outside, her reflection staring back in the dark glass. She wasn't broken. She wasn't a victim. She was a storm gathering strength. And by the time part 4 unfolded, the world would know exactly what Kira Jennings was capable of. The rain pelted the city like needles as Kira Jennings stood before the gleaming facade of the Viridian Technologies headquarters. She hadn't come for a corporate showdown. She had come for closure. But what closure meant, revenge, redemption, or both, still swirled in her chest like the storm overhead. The plan was already in motion. Kira's hidden lab, powered by trusted allies and ethical investors, had secured the launch of the clean energy prototype originally stolen by Ethan. Her design, the one he presented as his own to the board, was now patented under her name. This time, with bulletproof documentation and a digital trail leading back to his theft. Inside the boardroom, the senior stakeholders, media representatives, and legal counsel gathered. It was supposed to be Ethan's big day, a new contract, billions in federal grants, a green tech revolution. But Greg had arrived before him. With flash drives and sealed evidence folders, Greg's role had always been a mystery. But now, his allegiance had a shape. He stood before the crowd, hands trembling only slightly, and began to unravel the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, I have evidence of intellectual property theft, executive misconduct, and breach of ethics involving Ethan Cole. These designs, he held up blueprints with Kira's initials burned into the metadata, do not belong to him. A wave of murmurs surged. Cameras clicked. Kira stepped in next, her presence slicing through the chaos like a scalpel. This design was created in my home, on my equipment, refined over years of labor. Ethan Cole manipulated records and silenced whistleblowers. I was one of them. Not anymore. Ethan barged into the room mid-statement, soaked and fuming. Kira, you vindictive little save it. Greg cut him off sharply. You buried her because she trusted you. You destroyed her work because it threatened your ego. And now, you're done. Kira didn't blink. You left footprints, Ethan. Deleted files leave shadows. You forgot that. The SEC officials present stood and approached Ethan. He backed away instinctively, but there was nowhere left to run. Within hours, headlines flooded the news. Viridian CTO Ethan Cole under investigation for intellectual property fraud. Stock prices plummeted. Kira's name surged to the top of trending lists, but the most powerful moment came later. In a quiet rooftop cafe Greg had led her to. I had the chance to warn you years ago, Greg said, his voice thick. I didn't. I let Ethan win. I let you fall. You helped me rise now, Kira replied. That counts more. He looked up, pained but relieved. Do you ever think about what we could have been if things had been different? She reached across the table, took his hand. I think we still can be. The city pulsed around them. Somewhere far below, Ethan was escorted into a black car by federal agents. Somewhere else, a girl with ideas bigger than her pain had taken back her power. Kira wasn't looking for revenge anymore. She had something better. Reckoning wasn't always about destruction. Sometimes it was about resurrection, moral and life. Lesson: true power lies not in vengeance, but in reclaiming your voice and values.